my friends, I'm Rick and little Missy sitting over here enjoying herself. It is Sunday, coming up on, what is it, 19th? May 19th of 2024. And it's been a long, long week, and I'm still tired. Hit almost, I had 58 hours as of 3 o'clock Saturday morning, so, you know. And I gotta go back out tonight, 8 o'clock this evening until about 6 o'clock in the morning. So I got another all-night job tonight. That means basically I got no weekend. I had most of yesterday off, most of the day off, but it just still, when you work, my argument has always been if you work in a 24-hour window, you work that damn day. Even if you only work for half an hour, if you have to work till 12:30 in the morning for some anal reason, and they sit there and said, well, you had the day off, the hell you did. The hell you did. That's not how that works. Not in my world anyway. What the hell do I know? So it got to me. I was out there working the other night and half asleep, and I got thinking about antiquity and ancient civilizations. There's been a huge debate forever about how old humanity is, how old human civilization is, and we have scientific evidence that dates modern humans being around for hundreds of thousands of years. Hundreds of thousands. The next nearest descendant or ancestor to the humans, millions of years. Modern civilization, as we define civilization, is only something that happened biblically speaking, the last 5,000 or 6,000 years. And if you go back to the earliest versions of the Bible and very first chapter, Genesis says a lot of things that are very conflicting from a logic, science-based perspective in my imagination. And that you have to take a lot of things on faith when you look at any religious text, because the religious dogma demands that you believe this, and this must be, because this says this must be. So my conjecture, and it's one of those things that help push me more and more into being an agnostic when it comes to religion than a practicing Christian anymore. Is aside from all the hypocrisy that just buries the faith today, is that there's this mandatory buy-in. You must believe this way. You must accept on blind faith. Okay, so if we accept on blind faith that what the Bible says is the literal God's truth, then the timelines that are poorly muddled and defined in Genesis is confusing as fuck. The story of Adam and Eve and then Cain and Abel. Now, if you go by conventional Christian mindset in certain camps, that literally was the beginning of the Bible, was the beginning of human history, and it was, circa 6,000 AD or BC. Ignoring the fact that there was ample evidence, even in biblical times, that Egypt, for example, was an ancient civilization that had won and waxed many times over the millennia, not the centuries, the millennia, the thousands, more than a thousands of years prior to Genesis in the Bible, if that's how you believe it. Or Genesis predates the Egyptian Empire, because all this is set in that region of the world. So we're only focused on that, because at the same time that the biblical city-states and nations and the pharaohs of ancient Egypt and so on were in their heyday of persecuting Jews and slaughtering, whatever. The Chinese were having a quite grand time developing their own civilizations in detail, in quite complicated and complex ways. It's just one example, and they weren't the only ones. Okay. So we go back to the stories of Genesis. Well, the beginnings of Adam and Eve, and then it leads to Cain and Abel. Right away, the story becomes problematic because it's said that God made Adam in his image and then made Eve out of a token from Adam. Sorry, ladies, that's the Christian dogma. They've tried to play it down, but that's what it is now. It's always been that way. So, there were no other human beings as far as God was concerned, or Adam and Eve was concerned. So Adam and Eve have their misfortune with the apple and the snake, and however that played out. And they find themselves kicked to the curb. So they do what human beings do. They copulated, had some sons. Their sons grew up, and then found wives. Now, see, that's a question that comes up a lot over the decades, and I'm sure many a preacher man's been going, well, yeah, but what? So biblically speaking, the Bible supports that there were ancient civilizations out there before Adam and Eve. They had to have existed before Adam and Eve in order for them to have many daughters for Adam and Eve's boys to hook up with. They had to come from somewhere. They weren't sheep. They weren't pig women. Or were they? Were they Neanderthals? Because there's some arguments in the Christian world that I've been around in my life that make that very argument. Oh, well, those are Neanderthals. They're still God's creatures, but they just weren't human. Yeah, sure. I mean, because the only thing worse would be to say that Adam had 2 boys and 2 girls. Which would then put the lie to what? Yeah, see how that goes into an angle that nobody wants to address that. They want to step around it. And we find that same conundrum when we deal with Noah and Noah's story. But ancient civilizations, in the biblical term, existed. Because we have the stories from Lot's stories and the destruction of Sodom and Gamora. It doesn't stipulate what decade, what century, what millennia that occurred in. But what they do describe by modern standards sure the hell sounds like a nuclear strike to me. It sure turned everybody into ash. Sure slick too. Anyway, so we come back down to Genesis, and it's in this region that we hit Noah's Ark, the Noah's Ark timeline. So Noah, who, if you just focus on how the Christian Bible story focuses, Noah's approached by God, warned that there's going to be a terrible catastrophe. He's going to flood the world. There's something terrible going to happen. He needs to build this big boat. And I use the term loosely because a boat's not, when they call it an ark, an ark is appropriate because it's a giant-ass barge. The ark has no propulsion system. It has no masts, no sails, no tiller, no rudder, none of that. It's very specific in the Bible. He didn't include any of that stuff. It was a big honking floating box. So a barge is what this thing was supposed to be. We have, and I'll use the term circumstantial evidence today, that believes that they've located the remains of such a craft in the vicinity of where the biblical story says it's set down. So there's some validity to that. We'll also ignore because this is all would be a different video, is that there is numerous cultures around the world that share the exact same type of flood story. Some entity, some powerful being, some kindly stranger, some scary whatever, come out of nowhere, tells one guy to build a thing to protect everybody and everybody they love and all the plants and animals they can carry, And if you look at the timeline, and I don't know of anybody, I've never seen anybody lay out all these stories and then try to put how close together their formation, the estimates for their formation occurs. Because it sure seems like there's at least 7 or 8 different cultures around the world that have this great flood myth thing similar to Noah. And that if you follow the Noah story, this is so. And why wouldn't God, in his or her infinite wisdom, deem it might be better to not have all my eggs in one basket? So let's have multiple Noahs around the world prepare for the end of the world. Enough so that we now have multiple ethnic diversions of humanity spread around the world. Because that's one of those things that's always been an interesting side topic that very few people want to talk about, at least that I've ever run across, is how is it that humanity is such a diverse when it comes not culturally but racially speaking. You don't have to go far to line up the major racial groups and see the physical outward, extremely physically different outward appearances. You know, we can further break that down into regional stuff, but when you look at we look at the Anglo-Saxons and the Africans and the Native Americans, Polynesians, and the Asians and Chinese Asians, and then there's the Middle East and India Asians, or however you want to, they may not all consider themselves Asians, but the fact is these extremely dominantly different appearances in the genetic pool. And considering how many thousands of years the pool has been intermixing, you would think that it just goes to show you how strong these genetic markers are, that we haven't diluted the entire race down to a homogenized whatever. So that's by divine inspiration or just dumb luck, or we just haven't seen evolution a wide enough spread yet for that to see that to occur. So when we talk about ancient civilizations, obviously Noah was saving his family and a handful of animals that came to him from this massive thing that's going to wipe out. And why would they have to be saved? Well, it's because the majority of the world is going to die. So this implies, right in the biblical stories, of the great cataclysm that wipes out the entire planet, or enough of the planet to force a complete redo. Now you can attach whatever religious connotations to it you choose, but the physical actual facts, we have those. And the only indications of this younger Dryas being the latest version of the great flood event. But we also show evidence in various portions of the world where many of these events have occurred more than once, and more than once in modern history, i.e. in the next, if we consider 10,000 years to be appropriate block of time versus, because in the grand scheme of things, our 20, 30 years, our 50 to 100 year lifespan is nothing compared to the grand scheme of things. So the Bible says and pushes the fact that ancient civilizations exist. It also gives us the vehicle from why they ceased to exist, i.e. the Great Flood. So if the Younger Dryas was the period of time when Noah's flood took place, that means definitively Noah was alive in that period, that 100-year window of the Younger Dryas, which would then theoretically place, being his third generation, he's the son or grandsons of Cain or Abel, whichever. That would mean that you go back 15,000 years and they got Eden, or an entirely different world, an entirely different set of human civilizations who may have progressed in ways we can't dream, because we can't fathom how they could have done that and not retained it. without fully coming to grips with just how devastating some of these world-changing events are. So things like the flood in the biblical flood, yeah, and you would have cultures that survived, and every one of them would have a story about it, and they would all probably have a story about how they survived it, because that's what they're gonna. How did we get lucky, and everybody else we thought we knew is gone? Kind of, survivor's remorse. You have to go and you have to wonder about that sort of thing. So yeah, the stories are there. The physical history shows things too. If you dig into the controversies around the Great Sphinx there in Egypt, on the Giza Plateau, the evidence, once you really see it in open light, is weighted to the side that says that it's a much older construct than the pyramids are. So that the fact that there have been a civilization in and around the Great Plateau and in Giza for thousands of years prior to the height of the Egyptian empires, when they built the damn Great Pyramids, or supposedly built the Great Pyramids. Because there's more and more evidence and more conjecture that it argues that the ancestors of the modern Egyptians had nothing to do with building the Great Pyramids, at least the key ones. There's a whole slew of secondary ones that were smaller, not as well made. Those I buy. Humans trying to mimic their betters kind of thing. So, that said, evidence suggests that some, like the Great Pyramid, is much older than what we say it is, or what our, the current accepted story is. And like anything human beings have got to do with, truth is relative. Truth is relative. Think about that for a minute. We go through our entire lives every day banking on certain conventions and understandings that we are all going to operate in the same predictable manner. So I challenge you to consider that when the next time you're driving your car and you're driving down the road, you are entrusting that your fellow drivers sharing the road are going to follow the rules, the stoplights, the signs, paying attention, not being on their not being distracted. But you're taking a great assumption that those people around you are doing their part, because they're doing the same. They're assuming the same thing self-consciously. We don't think about it as it just is. We just go about our day and we don't think about it. Then we're assuming that everybody's going to retain the same page. So once in a blue moon, somebody snaps. Their page comes to an end. They suddenly lose the ability to comprehend what they're reading, or the page is yanked out from under them and they don't know how to cope with it. So you're driving down the highway, and grandma on the other, coming at you the other way, has a heart attack. Her body fails. Now it's up to now it's a speeding bullet looking right at you. You didn't have any control over that, and hopefully you can avoid taking the bullet, but that's one of those things. Then there's also the person who just is pushed beyond all restraint, and they finally crack, snap, become suicidal or extremely uber aggressive, and decide that the only way they can fix their life and make their life better is to destroy yours in the process. They decide to do that. I mean, so how do you end up with there from here? I have no idea. Right? I'm not even sure how the hell I got into the tangent I'm at now. That's just how tired I am. Yeah, I believe the evidence for the ancient civilizations they do exist. Rather, the entities like Atlantis existed in and of the form that we think it does, such as what Plato said. I don't know. Could it be an exaggeration? Could it be just pure science fiction? Plato could have wrote a science fiction book. It's a fictional story to be made to entertain people, and that sometimes too many people take things like that to be literal truth, and then are terribly disappointed, or worse, when they discover that the truth they've been living on has been a lie. It's a hard way to deal with things. I believe that humanity goes back much further than what we give it credit for. I believe that, yeah, there were other civilizations that humanity had developed before the Great Flood, before some great biblical whatever. I believe that our oldest texts, amongst most of our oldest texts, are biblical in nature, that they're all subject to human nature. Well, I don't like how that story ends. Let me change the story. Oh, our God would not do that. Let's change the story. Let's change the proverb. Well, we don't interpret that to sound like that anymore because that sounds terrible. Let's interpret it to sound like this. So let's have the new revised version of said Bible, and on and on and on. Then you have the interpretation part. It's the same problem with archaeologists. The same problem. Interpretation and convention. Over and over again, I hear these stories about fringe people in their chosen professions being, lobotomized in many ways, and downplayed and ridiculed in others, because they have this idea that goes against the accepted main flow. And most of the accepted main flow want it to stay that way, because anything that challenges that accepted main flow puts into question everything that they hold to be the foundation of their universe. No wonder it's a conflict of interest problem, even when the reality is maybe we've got something wrong and we've had it wrong forever. Ancient civilization only started when no, it didn't. Even the Bible says it's much older than that. And then that's how you fill in those. Well, how the hell did Cain and Abel find spouses, let alone other people? How is it that Noah had to save his family when he couldn't save how many untold people that were doomed to die because of this, that, and the other thing? You just have to go, sure. I think the truth is much grander and much simpler than what a lot of people want it to be. I don't always understand why you get to a certain mindset you're not willing to accept change because it screws with your narrative, kind of thing. It's just like when I hear people in the political front today misquoting the Bible, something fierce. Especially these political leaders who they themselves are self-proclaimed Bible thumpers, who profess to be, follow God's will, the Bible. You want to know what I want, or how I see something, or how I view something? Look at the Bible. Well, then, my good man, I have to ask you, why are you not walking? Why are you not walking the talk? Why are you're preaching it, but you're not walking it? You're talking about this, but you're not interpreting it the way it appears that it should be interpreted. See, therein lies the thing. That was one of the things I took away from my years growing up in a Christian family full of ministers. That everybody understands where the Bible verse is. Not everybody agrees with how the Bible verse is to be read, let alone how you are to read it. And there's a difference there. The subtle difference is, how does the pastor present this to you in an entertaining and informative way that you will find some kind of beneficial use out of, and make the pastor, make you at least appreciate the pastor's effort. You just have to make that, how much of it is been doctored and changed and altered and manipulated to fit various narratives that constantly change. Right? So when I look at things like the hardcore evidence, these suggestions of these ancient constructions that go back tens of thousands of years, and we keep finding more and more of them, and it's pretty damn foregone when you uncover them, and they do the dating, and they go, oh my God, this is from 20,000 years ago, or this is 100,000 year old site. Well, human beings were gathering there and doing things in that ceremonial site 100,000 years ago. Uh, just saying, we sell ourselves short on a regular basis too. It's sad, you know. It is what it is. Till next time. Yeah, I'm a little less tired, a little more energy. You guys have yourself a great weekend. It just irritates me to no end.